Welcome to Season 2 of the Inspectations Podcast, hosted by Justin Starbird, CEO of the Abley Group. In business, as in life, one of the most difficult tasks a leader must do is find a way to manage expectations. Create expectations that are too high, and you will be constantly looked at as a failure. Create expectations that are too low, and your leadership will be questioned at every turn. Being able to inspect what you expect helps keep great teams pulling in the same direction and allows for pivots in real time. The Inspectations Podcast brings together business leaders from all industries to talk about best practices, innovation, leadership, and business development. You're listening to the Inspectations Podcast. Here's your host, Justin Starbird.
Welcome back to the Inspectations Podcast, powered by the Abley Group. My name is Justin Starbird, and this afternoon, I'm fortunate to be able to welcome back a good friend of mine, first two-time guest to the Inspectations Podcast, CEO and Managing Principal of the Morningside Group, Mark Sponseller. Mark, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to my plaque commemorating my first second-time guest. But no, please, it's good to be back.
It's awesome to have you, man. It's funny. You and I catch up pretty often and talk about what's going on in the world. And, friends for a while, worked with a couple of different clients together. But you've gone out on your own. We talked about the last time you were on, you were just getting started with the Morningside Group. Talk a little bit about, what you guys are doing now.
Yeah, we're, as you might remember from the last podcast, when we explained Morningside, we're kind of three-legged stool in some respects. We focus on mergers and acquisitions, and it's kind of across the spectrum, but then we also do financial, IT, and operational consulting, and that's everything from traditional consulting to the third leg of the stool, which is interim management. So things have been busy. I think we're seeing a lot more on the non-M&A side. I think, the mergers and acquisitions marketplace has cooled a bit, and some of that is driven by the interest rate environment we see and just difficulty in underwriting forecasts, which make doing the deals difficult, and as well as the commercial banking kind of pulling back a bit with, candidly, I think looking at their own CRE portfolios and wondering what kind of noise is coming down the path there. They're less likely to lend. It's certainly at the levels they were years past.
Sure.
But offsetting that, we've seen a tremendous amount of work with companies who are now feeling the stress and pain. So that's everywhere, everything from helping them better understand their business and how they look at it and address some issues that perhaps weren't addressed for a long time, as well as stepping into the role, whether it be a marketing analyst, a CFO. I'm now currently serving as CEO of a company, and to a controller, and kind of runs the gamut, and doing some really hands-on work on IT as well. So seeing a lot on that side of the house.
And you have a great team. You keep growing, adding more talent to your bench, as you call it.
Yeah, we do. And the talent market is still tight, and we're looking for a unique type of individual who's really maybe has the basics of all the skills necessary to do consulting, but do it in a different way. We like to think of ourselves as being much more the feel of being a principal rather than an agent. We want our people to get that kind of experiences. We like stepping into the roles, and even when we do consulting, we very much like to do it in a way where we're partnering with our clients.
Sure.
And it feels like we're a member of the team.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to build. You're right. I think we are close to having, and we just brought in our IT bench. There's some other things we have working, and then we have about 3 more people in the pipeline. So lots of stuff going on.
That's great. It's interesting. You mentioned coming in and being part of the team. You and I met several years ago while, working with a good friend of ours now, who was getting his house in order, so to speak, so that they could, take advantage of the M&A money that was so available for a short period of time where, people couldn't give enough of it away to some of these companies. And today, you're in a unique position because, you had the experience of coming in and helping get houses in order, but you also come in and, as we were talking offline, help some ailing companies as well. Mm-hmm. How do you do that?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of the same skill set. It's just, what does your future look like? As you mentioned, and we've done a number of things where we're helping companies prepare for an exit, and that's a few years off. And And a lot of times those companies are good companies that just haven't addressed the basic issues that they need to address. They've been focused so much on growth and not on anything on infrastructure. And so we come in and kind of backfill and put those things in place. And that's led to the outcomes like where you and I had been in the past working together. Similar skill set now, I think, we find there's not a lot of people who are well prepared for the kind of environment that we're going into. I think last year supply chain, for example, and labor shortage really was the first ripple that kind of caught a lot of management teams off guard. And in response, probably a lot of them made some pretty bad decisions, particularly in the space where you have to order and you're sourcing from China or sourcing from overseas. People went real long and are now figuring out how to unwind some of those decisions they made last year. So we're seeing a lot of stress on that front. You couple that with the human resource stress in terms of finding and retaining people, and then the interest rate environment, lenders being a lot more hands-on and a little bit tighter on credit facilities and things of that nature, that those things kind of combine. So what we tend to do is we tend to work and first get everyone to one source of truth, what's really going on, where are the pain points, and then really help them.
Is that like the most difficult part of things, like that part there, the finding that source of truth? I feel like
I'm always surprised, to be honest with you, that you get in there, and we generally, when we end up taking on one of these, we generally get a few pieces of information and we kind of form an initial view of what we think is going on. Then we get in and start talking to people, and we're doing the analyses that we do. And then I'm always amazed there's probably about half of what we find out that nobody was even really aware of, or said differently, they didn't place the proper amount of emphasis on, it was issue number 14 on their list. It's really issue number 2 of where it should be. I think, a lot of times people, it's amazing to me, a focus on earnings versus cash and how cash is likely to move as your business, works its way through a cycle. The lack of thinking on that is usually what causes a lot of problems, a lot of stress. So
have you had any examples maybe in the past where that was pretty evident?
Yeah, for sure. When you're, they're all kind of bespoke, but they're all kind of general, which that just kind of totally contradicts each other. But it's kind of interesting. They're generally the same insofar as they're process related, and they've never been, you haven't applied any critical thinking. I think some people have not revisited strategy. They're working on 2019 strategy in a 2023 environment, and not surprised, it's like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And then, so that's usually a big issue. It's kind of strategy, lack of focus on cash flow, a lack of really focus on what is our business, where should we be, should we be concerned about customers? One recent example is, when your largest customer is showing definite, you have a fair amount of concentration with them and they're showing definite signs of distress, you should be taking proactive actions to de-risk yourself instead of riding that train to the bottom. But that's hard. It's easy to keep selling to a customer who won't pay you. It's hard to make a decision that we need to pivot away from that customer, de-risk it a bit, and find other customers and other paths. And that's a real life example of one particular instance that we do see quite a bit out there.
It's interesting because that's generally comes from leadership, right? Because it's the easy way out, especially continuing to sell to somebody that won't pay you. You're seeing inventory going out the door, and so the thought is that you'll get money or some sort of return from that. So you want to see those goods go out the door and parked somewhere, but if you're not getting anything on the backside, so it's really generally a lack of leadership. Is that what you see often?
Oh, for sure. And by that, you're really kind of saying a lack of a willingness to make a decision that may be disconnected from where you were going. I always kind of think about CEOs and CFOs and chief operating officers, and I think one of the major shortcomings from a psychological standpoint, and I don't have a psychological degree, but I'm a freelance, practitioner, is, it's almost equating major pivot and approach is a recrimination that the strategy you were previously following was incorrect. And that's exactly the opposite way you should view. Good management teams can assess when something's not working, no matter how strongly they were for it before, and they make pivots. And the quicker you do that, the less damage you do to your business. The slower you do that, the more damage you do to your business. And I will say that is one of those commonalities that we see when we go into a distressed situation. Someone's clearly not recognized the realities and continue to say, well, we'll just stack hands and try harder to do the same things we've been trying to do, even though they clearly are not working.
Yeah, you've talked, and in today's environment where there's so much unrest. At one point, I know I've heard you call it a Jekyll and Hyde economy, but what that does is it presents really two types of leaders. You have the peacetime leaders that can do no wrong through accelerated growth, and then you have wartime leaders who they're making tough decisions and leading by example because that's what they've done. Can you talk a little bit about that, because I know it's a topic that's near to you and something that you're more of an expert on?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of, this sounds bad, we kind of think of ourselves as kind of wartime leaders because we generally are coming in situations where we special situations where the company is being stressed for one reason or another. And it could be discrete, and that's more of a consulting engagement, or more broad, and that's an interim management engagement more often than not. So I think the last 12 to 14 years, we've, set aside COVID, that was a weird couple of years, but by and large, last 12 to 14 years, we've had sustained growth. And, there are a lot of management teams who can do really well in that environment. And some of it is because of their talent, and some of it is they're just lucky. Now you're getting into a path where there's much more competition for labor, much more competition for market and pricing, and much more competition around sourcing, and just so many factors they have to juggle. I think we are finding out real time which teams are peacetime teams and which teams are wartime teams. And again, that sounds kind of negative, but it really isn't. It's really who are the ones who are not afraid to challenge the status quo, who are not afraid to pivot their business, who can take a risk and try to see ahead of the curve. That it's that mindset approach, as opposed to those who have just been happy to continue to follow a strategy that was working, even to the point when it's clearly not. So that's really the differential.
Yeah. Generally speaking, are we entering into a wartime, time frame in terms of economic factors, or are we in it already? What are you seeing from your vantage point?
Yeah, it's going to sound self-serving, but I mean, I very much believe that we've been in it for a while, and that's why we're seeing some stress. People have not recognized that, and it's a crazy world out there. If you're searching for reasons we're up, I'm sure you can find some on the internet to say that how everything's bright. If you're searching for if they're down, you can find that as well. I will tell you what I see, boots on the ground, is that we're very much in a wartime situation, and we will be for a while. And it's a couple of things. I mean, when I mentioned the labor markets still are tight and will continue to be so, I think we are seeing a nascent and evolving deterioration in the commercial real estate market that will have implications for lending broadly. Even if you're looking for cash flow or asset-based lending, and you have nothing to do with commercial real estate, you're going to be impacted by the banks being impacted by that. And then, there's just a lot of inflationary pressures, which you have to manage. And that has to do as much with how do you deal with that with your customers, as well as how do you deal with that from a sourcing standpoint, being creative and thoughtful, and then getting control on costs, control of the cash. There's so many, it's the death of a thousand cuts. And there's so many teams who do not focus on their cost structure and spending wisely. It's not cutting spending per se, although you should always strive to be efficient. But do you really need to spend that money on some aspect of your overhead operation, or are you better positioned to spend that money on new sales force to take advantage of other people who may be taking their eye off the ball, to kind of get in front of, counterbalancing some of the adverse situations we're seeing? So in my mind, we're in a wartime situation. I think the commercial real estate aspects have to play out. We have to see what that means. I think, will these things likely last 12 to 18 months to 24 months, and that's probably what we'll see.
You mentioned that we were in this growth stage of 12 to 14 years. And now, you're thinking the negative will be, 12 to 24 months. Is there any chance it could be longer than that?
Yeah, I mean, if I really knew, I probably wouldn't be talking to you. I'd be on a beach somewhere. But yeah, I mean, I'm just going from history. I think, anytime there's a crisis, and as we go deeper into this one, and there's a lot of things that could affect it. People always think that this is the new normal, it can last forever. And certainly you would like to avoid like the lost decade plus that Japan has experienced. I mean, that is certainly a possibility where you look at sustained levels of anemic growth and very little ability to do anything about it. There are some comparisons between our situation and where they were 20 years ago and kind of where they are now, and you certainly can make that. But I would say from history, everyone thought in 07, 08 that was the kind of the end of the world. And then you kind of get to the back half of 09, and albeit there were some bumps here and there, we kind of had sustained come out of it. So I suspect this will be the same way. I mean, who knows, but that's what I think,
Yeah. Hey, hopefully we're on the beach together somewhere. That'd be a lot of fun. But
that would be great.
Wives, children, the whole deal.
Yes.
So what can, it sounds scary, but, generally speaking, it should be some common sense stuff too. Like, what can businesses do to be, aware of themselves and be, do some self-evaluation of where they are and what they should fix?
Yeah, I think it starts with, strategy. And we talked about that, and really assessing what is your strategy and where you're going and where are your weaknesses and how are you addressing how well are you reading the tea leaves and how well are you aligning your strategy to that. I think on a very close second is evaluating your cash and liquidity position and truly evaluating it. There's so many companies I see. Yes, EBITDA is a proxy for cash flow, but it can be very disconnected from cash flow as well. And I think you need to understand that, because the conversion rate from EBITDA to cash may shift dramatically, particularly as your customers become more stressed. And then how are you going to deal with that such that they don't drag you into the same situation? So, I always tell people, don't, when you're in a wartime situation, don't plan for where you are today, but do some sensitivity around what if we lost 10 to 15% top line, like what actions would we take to bring that back, but then also to better weather that storm. I think you have to question things like your cost structure, and you have to look at spending smartly, and you have to evaluate your people structure and where do we best need to deploy resources and fill gaps and make sure that we're strong so we can weather the storm, but also pick up market. And I think, bad times oftentimes lead to the best deals being done and the best, market share being grabbed. But I think you have to proactively go after it. But you also have to make sure that where you're going actually suits where the market is. But then you also have to make sure you have the money to do it. And where people get caught is, again, they don't adjust strategy. They kind of operate on historical maxims of, EBITDA to cash conversion cycles. They don't really truly evaluate the liquidity position. And then sometimes they actually do the worst thing, which is they pull back from the market and they cut the kind of spending that's important to kind of sustain growth as much as you can. And
that was going to be the next question for you. Okay. Is, what you mentioned a couple of times, grabbing share and actually, putting yourself in a position to sell more, or, to, I wouldn't say get bigger necessarily, but certainly take advantage of deals that are out there. If sitting in my spot as an owner, CEO of a marketing agency, one of the first things that we see is people cutting budgets and saying, well, we're going to have to let you go. And I always tell them, I'm like, hey, listen, for 6 months, it's not gonna, you have a runway. It's good. We are 6 months out, and you're not gonna be having these conversations with me again until that flattens. There's no more qualified leads coming in, or there's no more traffic to the website, or there's no more, content coming out. And inevitably, 5 months later, 6 months later, it's like, oh no, we have nothing. Our phones stop ringing. We're not getting anything. What do we do? And it was, well, 6 months ago, we were prepared for this, what do you tell clients about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what rather than telling them, I would probably spend some time understanding how they're looking at their external environment and how is that governing their actions. There's a lot of information, if you really have good communication systems, that you can find about your competitors and what they're doing. And it's amazing to me how many people know very little about that. And when we come in and we start having these discussions, we start getting that feedback. So this gets to so if you had that feedback and you understood where people were on pricing and where your competitors are doing, if your competitors are pulling back, you shove forward because the market's still there, and you're just spending smartly to kind of capture the ultimate coming out of it, but also to, everything you can bring on that a competitor loses, that benefits you in two ways. So yeah, we certainly would look at marketing and advertising spend like we would look at it in any other cost category. But what we tend to do is go at it and look and say, well, what's working, what's not. Mm-hmm. When times are good, it's tough to tell like where you're getting the most bang for the buck. When things level out or kind of bump around, you find out that maybe SEO spend is not the greatest path to generating additional revenue opportunities. Perhaps more direct sales, kind of guerrilla marketing is a better approach, or vice versa. Maybe you've done nothing on SEO, and a lot of people are doing that. We would say, the kind of basic approach of just going and drawing lines through cost areas and solving the problem that way is probably not terribly good for the long-term health of the business. We would say, reevaluate your strategy. Mm-hmm. Figure out how best to work with your existing partners, if they're good partners, to better align the right spending for the next 12 to 18 months, which may be very different in a wartime strategy than it is in a peacetime. And
sure,
you probably get the best for it.
You mentioned at one point, I love this line, the Doug Flutie School of Management. I wrote it down. And it kind of keeps going on what you're talking about now, because in the context was you and I were talking about, remedies that could potentially be implemented, for companies before things get out of hand. And I loved that. I loved what you said about that.
Well, okay. So this is the other end of the spectrum. There's the, paralysis stage where you just keep doing the same strategy, expecting different results. And then there's the way on the other end of the spectrum where someone is just doing some really wacky stuff that you look at it and like anyone, it's almost like there's an emperor has no clothes aspect where there are several people in the management team who are like, this is a really bad idea. But, you have someone who's come up with, oftentimes the CEO has come up with an idea that's just so out there that while it may make sense in some instances, it's just completely disconnected from strategy,
Yeah.
And we see that, and oftentimes what you see is like, one, the critical thinking hasn't been done to evaluate the strategy and whether or not this initiative they're doing is going to make sense in light of the overall strategy where we want to go. But two, they also haven't nailed down the details. They haven't done the work. So someone will come up with something, like let's open, an office in this country and move some equipment over there and try to greenfield something. So we think we'd be a partner with someone, and I'm kind of using very general terms, but an initiative like that is a big move, and yes, maybe that's the right answer, but oftentimes you see there's been very little work done around it, and it's kind of like, well, it's almost like that's the where you see a peacetime team stretching. That's why I call it Doug Flutie, just throwing up Hail Marys. They've convinced, well, I have to do something to address this. And rather than doing the work, which is hard, and sit down and be thoughtful and get to a good answer, certainly moving with speed, they come up with crazy ideas of like major, vertical integration, which may make sense, may not, but not even thinking through what was really practical, or major new initiatives, or if you're a D2B business and all of a sudden you're like, I know we'll solve this, we'll go to D2C. Well, that's a very different operating model.
Yeah,
and can really kind of make the matters worse. So yes, the Doug Flutie School of Management, for those of us who are old enough to remember Doug Flutie, it's not
Boston College, right?
The Hail Mary pass, right?
Yeah. Well, here in New England, we'll never forget it. So
Yeah.
that's all right though. Hey, he was great. Played for the Bills, Patriots. Anyway,
Yeah.
when is it too late? Speaking of Hail Marys, when is it too late to bring in a Morningside, and when are you unable to help anymore?
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down to liquidity. I mean, notwithstanding the fact that strategy is the most important thing, it comes down to liquidity. If you get to a too deep of a place there's limited things that we can certainly help, but then you may be looking at a prepackaged situation or seeking protection from creditors because I don't have a money tree and I can't tell anyone how to grow one. So if you've gotten yourself really upside down, oftentimes, we can make that assessment fairly quickly. And that's another one where, I've seen people throw bad money after good for so they're making the problem even worse. They're digging the hole even deeper, which makes the emergence even that much more difficult. The only other thing is sometimes these are less frequent, but, the world's a changing world and sometimes there's a shift in the broader market around what you offer and you haven't made reactions to it. I think of like Eastman Kodak and some of the strategies they pursued, and we all know that they're a very different, I don't know if they exist anymore, but different company. They kind of rode the film business to the bottom after being a very strategic company and had spun off a number of units. That's another situation we get in there and we look at it, and those are tough to come out of because you have to make transformation over time at that level. And if you try to do that immediately, it's, again, you get back to liquidity. The cost of doing that is insane. Yeah. So it's really, liquidity. We take a hard look at that, not only where they stand, but where they're going. And we can make an assessment of whether or not it's a bit too late. And then that becomes a very different kind of engagement.
So let's say you get through an engagement and, it by and large was successful. You bring in either new leadership or you've, properly trained leadership on the best way to move forward, made some restructuring or improved operations. Do you ever get called back? Or, is it something where you're, able to give them a playbook and, hey, as long as you go by this, you'll be good?
Yeah, if we do it right, now we can be called back for discrete issues. We're always still available. Things pop up that weren't there when we were there. But by and large, we're not what I'll call, report writers where, here's a deck, good luck, God bless, and we'll see you later. We're much more focused on getting to one source of truth, figuring out what the issues are, helping the company make changes, whether that be with people, certainly with processes. If you do that correctly and you get people all on the same page and you've made the process changes or certainly got them going with a clear path of where they're going, oftentimes we see fairly sustained performance, and it's always a mixture of people and processes. And so that's why, our hopes are that we don't really get called back. It could certainly happen, but more often than not, if we've done our job right and you help them find the right people and you plug them in to be successful and we've addressed processes that led to the problem, we fix those, then they should be on that's usually what we leave behind is those kind of best practices that we've learned. It's funny, like, again, this gets the commonality. Everyone seems to make 80% of the same bad decisions, and they oftentimes, relate to bad processes, and we can help fix those.
Sure. So, thinking about where we are today, what's next for you and the Morningside Group?
Yeah, I think we'll continue to grow. We're currently broadening our IT bench strength. We're broadening our financial operational bench strength. We are toying around with launching a new business line on human capital resource management, which we think is something that's going to continue to be a challenge for everyone, both from a regulatory standpoint and from a just finding people and the right people and motivating standpoint. So we're excited about that. And I think we'll continue to just do what we're doing because we enjoy it and, selectively grow the team. We don't necessarily look to be the biggest, but we do want to have a unique feel to our client base and bring in the right people so they have a great experience for themselves and feel like they're kind of growing professionally and really getting again,
Sure.
it's just a truly unique experience relative to other options out there.
Yeah. Well, Mark, man, it's always great to have you on. It's always good to catch up with you.
Yeah, same here. It was good talking to you, and appreciate you having me on.
Likewise. Well, hey, as plaque will be forthcoming as the first 2-time guest. It's,
That's awesome.
Right. It's an exclusive club, but so apropos for what's going on right now. Love the idea of the wartime versus peacetime leadership. Love the idea of, really digging into the trenches of operations today. I think, it's more important than ever.
Yeah, for sure. And I got the space on my wall picked out for the plaque. So just I'll keep my eye out for it. Thanks, Justin.
Hey, on behalf of Mark Sponseller, CEO of the Morningside Group, you've been listening to the Inspectations Podcast. My name is Justin Starbird.
You have been listening to the Inspectations Podcast. On behalf of your host, Justin Starbird, and our guests today, thank you for listening. To learn more about the Inspectations Podcast, our guest, or the Abley Group, please visit us at www.ableygroup.com. Be sure to keep inspecting what you are expecting.